Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to LOPvox Live with your host, the Ghost Scientist. Join in our exciting conversations that are educational, informative, and oftentimes entertaining. So without further ado, this is LOPvox Live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to LOPvox Live. I'm your host, the Ghost Scientist, and we got our panel of guests today. Our panel is made up of Nolo, Rush, Scarlet, IW Steel, Irie, Hananada is all going to be a part of the panel of guests that we have on the show today. Our show today is going to focus on conspiracy sites and how you all got here. So I'm going to start the show out with Nolo. And Nolo, you know, we're discussing about conspiracy sites, you know, conspiracy theories, concepts, ideas, stories. So how exactly did you come to get involved in the conspiracy itself or in conspiracy sites themselves?
Well, it was kind of by accident, I suppose, or maybe it was planned event, no telling. You know, great cosmic plan involved, I don't know. But I always thought that things weren't how they seemed. There was always a rest to the story, and like Fire Sign Theater says, everything you know is wrong. And so I didn't have a clue. I would talk to people in the neighborhood or, you know, in grocery store lines or at work. All kinds of situations, and I'd get the deer in the headlight look, or I'd get blank stares, or I'd get, you know, calculated how soon can we lock this guy up.
But was there a specific one? Was there something specific that brought you to it? I mean, was there something that you could pinpoint down to say this was my reason behind it?
Yeah, once I got introduced to it, all right, once I realized, you know, the power of the internet and the online community, once I was introduced to the first ones, which I think it was Kent Stedman's, and I was like, wow, it was an avenue I hadn't thought of. So as people were discussing different issues, I realized that I had a point of contribution that I could bring to the table that I wasn't hearing from the other ones, where basically I'm an apologist, so I have a little background of theology and such, and sometimes that was touched, but it had a great deal of woo factor to it. So I thought, okay, I'll wait and then insert, you know, when appropriate. Well, I lurked for years before I actually posted my first post. But what I realized in the time of lurking and when I started posting, and especially while posting, because I saw this happening where for every one thing that you said or one person that commented on what you had to say, there was 100 people out there listening, reading, and hopefully assessing what you had to say. And I thought, now there's some power to this. This is like being in the Acropolis and you know, doing your thing. Here's my philosophy, and you throw it out there and the crowd mulls it over. Or this is the town square, and you get on your soapbox and you whatever political agenda you try and throw out there, and gauge what's going on in the rest of society. You listen to everybody else's soapbox or their speech, and you can come to some sort of understanding of which way the current of humanity is going that is not approached by the mainstream media or the slow process of going through the library and reading the latest published works, or like now, which is kind of the equivalent as talk radio. Back then, talk radio wasn't, it hadn't come up to speed as much as the internet at the time. And I thought, here is something that's going to be a nexus point, that is going to be something pivotal in human society. It's like we're living in two worlds. We have our, what we call in the online, the real world, and then you have the internet life. And it becomes kind of a blurred line of, well, which really is the real world? How much of yourself do you have invested in each of them? We tend to think the quote-unquote real world has got the importance to it because, well, you know, you make your living, you pay your bills, you know, you go on about your business, you get your education, etc. But then again, how much of the real internal workings going on inside of you, that can be accomplished anywhere. And I found on the internet that could be shared and maybe make more of a difference in another person's life than it would be if I'm in the middle of the checkout line and I try and share something with somebody.
Well, and my first question to you would be is, what was the name of the show, like the very first conspiracy site that you came to, and then what made you leave that specific site to try to find another one? Like, what was the specific reason behind changing from that first one that you found?
Well, that would have been Kent Steadman's cyberspace orbit. And actually, it was a process of migrating to someone who was helping him put together a forum. And that was Elaine, and she's the one that founded the original Godlike Productions. And so when that migration occurred, I stuck with her site and interacted with some of the members back and forth. And then there was another, I guess you call it disaster site, because the year 2000 was coming up. And they had they were preppers. I think they were Seventh-day Adventists, and it was called Time Bomb 2000. Well, they had some internal shenanigans going on between the owner and the mods and the members and stuff. And there was much umbrage and insults and the drama that goes with forums. And they migrated looking for a new home that was less abusive, and they ended up on Godlike Productions, which was an influx of about 1,000 to 1,500 people, which for a small forum of a couple hundred, that was a big deal. And from there, it of course, exponentially, the number of opinions, the number of information, the things that you know, like as yourself, you could bring to the table things from engineering, things, insiders that you heard. Well, the same thing occurred at Godlike Productions. We would get people from all over and all sorts of professions that could tell us the rest of the story or the inside information on what was going on. And there were some that were very good at sewing together the pieces. At the same time, there's a lot of woo that goes along with it, and there were some people that had good common sense, good scientific background, and were particularly articulate, and they could kind of damp down the woo factor, which, left of its own devices, the forums could go berserk with, and kept things more on a reality basis, where you could not necessarily believe what you were hearing, but you could assess it in a lot more comprehensive way than you can, say, from the mainstream media. And then from that, it grew, and I stuck with that until the GLP Godlike Productions had its own fiasco and migrated to Alien Earth. And then from there, once Lunatic Outpost was founded, because of some of the members that migrated there, I also migrated and stuck here. And the thing that interests me most still is this idea of the nexus, that this meeting point that people can have is an opportunity that you would not have. I can talk to people from New Zealand, from Australia, from Africa, from all parts of the U.S., and have my finger on the pulse of what people are thinking and what's going on. If you're being flim-flammed over in New Zealand, or they're telling you a different story over there, you can compare it with what you hear now. Now, what we can do with that information as being a nexus is, now that we have the pieces of the puzzle, what can we do with it? Which, that's a very important step, is getting the pieces of the puzzle. And that's what I see conspiracy theory sites, their great value is they're accumulating this massive encyclopedia of facts, information, and ideas that now can be used where we can pick a direction we want to go in.
So after so many years of having spent a lot of time between those three separate formats or forums, if you will, conspiracy forums, if you will, is there any specific conspiracy that like really sticks out in your mind that you really think, I know it's harder, would be difficult to pick a specific one and say this is the strongest conspiracy that you would follow, but just briefly give us an idea of like what one really you have passion for, like the one that you stick to, or the passion that you have for conspiracy.
Well, like I said, my original interest I was in apologetics, more specifically Christian apologetics. Now, I was interested in basically putting out facts, stamping out all these fires of disinformation. There's a lot of misperceptions of what the cosmology that's included in Christianity is about. One of the focal points, especially people in the early days of these conspiracy sites, is what were UFOs? And that's what caught my interest, and I did a lot of research on this. And what I found my favorite resource for this is a UFO researcher called Jacques Vallée, who I think by now has been 40 years at least in investigating and documenting all of the UFO phenomena, and a little bit of side branching into the paranormal, things like Bigfoot, things like the orbs and lights and that sort of thing. And the conclusion that he came up with paralleled what I had come up with from a totally different avenue. And so for me, I still participate in this, in one, damping down the woo factor dealing with UFOs. Let's just give the facts, ma'am, so to speak. And at the same time, tie that into what the overall cosmology that I bring to the table has for an explanation of why things are the way they are. So if you have a conspiracy about something, and obviously the world is not how it should be. We all have built into us this I don't know how many times we say, that's not fair. And so where did we get the indication, looking at the cosmos, where galaxies collide and billions of sentient species go extinct, where do we get the idea that there is any such thing as fairness? So in that search for that fairness, my cosmology has an explanation for that. It has an explanation for the UFO phenomena. And that, I back up a bit. What I found and what Jacques Vallée found was, it isn't necessarily that there's a extraterrestrial explanation, although that may be. That's kind of moot. The explanation for a phenomena where there's proof but not enough proof, there's evidence but not real concrete evidence, is to put your mind in the frame where I believe it and I don't believe it, but I don't make a decision on it. I try and hold both those ideas in my mind at the same time without coming to any sort of I'll rule one out. That frame of mind is the thing that the Christian cosmology is dead set against. It's the very thing that is the enemy, so to speak, quote unquote, is that you do need to find out what is reality. And that's what I like about the conspiracy theory sites, is you can discuss where we're being flim-flam, where's the camouflage, where's the smoke screen, and what's reality. Now, sorry I've rambled, but, there's about a billion different ideas all crammed in there together.
So it's as if the mystery itself created the genre. Is that what you're trying to say? The mystery itself created the genre of the conspiracy concept?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that was the clue, is why is there this conspiracy? Why aren't things clear? I mean, yes, I can see, foreign agents planting disinformation and that sort of thing, but this seemed to go across the board. This seemed full spectrum in every avenue that you look. And so, looking for an explanation for what would contrive an overall global conspiracy that went to every depth is, in the Christian cosmology, that's called the adversary. And obviously he's against the creator. So one's going for chaos and one's going for order. So I sniff around what direction things are going on, from chaos to order, from order to chaos.
So, you really came kind of full circle from a theological standpoint, like trying to find the answers that you were seeking within inside of your own theological faith or your own theological concept.
Yeah, yes, I could say that, I don't think there's anything that's unrelated, just like there's no such thing as a coincidence. Everything, that's the beauty of cosmology. Everything can be tied and associated together, and that's one of the signs whether your cosmology works or not, does everything incorporate into this? Is there a place for it? If there's an anomaly, then there's an explanation for it.
And I completely, I mean, I understand how you come to that conclusion, like how you went through the process of your research and found these pathways that kind of lead here. You know, that it's almost like following. It's like being inside of a maze, and you're just finding these twists and turns and angles, and it seems like all these twists and turns and angles, though they seem very complex, all seem to point towards more of a simple construct, if you will.
Yeah, and I think with all of us, it's like water finds its own level. I think that it's no great surprise the people that are here and their ways of thinking, I don't know, their ability to grasp things outside of what's on TV tonight. I think that, that's no accident. It's like a natural place for minds to meet. And that's, once again, I'm going to reiterate, this is a nexus. This is a special place. This is a special mindset even for that sort of thing to happen. It's synergistic, of course, but that's what I have in mind.
And like a far point station kind of concept, which I absolutely get. So, Rush, this brings us to you. Here we are. We're on LOP. We're on LOPvox Live with your host, the Ghost Scientist. Our next panel our panel member for discussion is Rush. So, Rush, tell us, what was the conspiracy, or what brought you to try to seek out or find this type of a format to have discussions and to get information, or to find information, or even give information to the masses?
Well, I appreciate that, Ghost. Most of my point is actually trying to understand where a lot of the people that I did talk to that had this question in their mind, right? And they were focused on trying to figure out what was going on. And some of you guys know me, enough so that they can say, there's a question in mind. Why is that possible? And I think that for me, personally, is really that point of being, because I really want to know why that is. Just not from a personal standpoint. That's really important to me too. But how does that work for the rest of us? That's the thing to keep in mind.
But let's go a little bit further than that, Rush. Like you made your way to LOP. How exactly did you get here? Like, what started the whole thing? There's always a starting point, something that triggered the event that brought you to the present. So what was that exact event, if you will, that started you down this kind of conspiratorial path, if you will?
Well, that's a very good question, man. I believe a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was actually interested in something that, because I didn't grow up in a church household. And I'll say that again. Somebody that's been so enthralled with the church. Now, I didn't have that aspect growing up. So that gave me a little bit more freedom, if you will, to explore a lot of these differences. And by the time I came to my mid-30s, I know it's been a long time, but, given that aspect, once you've actually reached to a point where these things aren't making sense to you, are they? They weren't for me. So I had to ask questions. So I had to go looking. And I did end up, even like Nolo, at GLP. And how I got there, it was a point of origin, actually, because it's like, you got these problems? Go look for these things. And that's how I found it. And it didn't work for me, per se. But, I'm still searching. And you really have to be doing that too. Because if you haven't really searched enough, you're missing the point.
But there's still, that's still kind of vague, Rush. Let's try to pinpoint. I think people are really interested in how people got on that specific path, if you will. So I know that you were discussing about that your family wasn't really, into the theology or religious side of it. Is that something that you were trying to seek? Is that something you were trying to find, as maybe to get some knowledge that you weren't given?
Well, you're right, Ghost. Yeah, actually, that's personally, man, you just hit it on the head. Because I was really searching for that aspect of myself. Because I think that's what really brings people to a place like this, or places that have that knowledge that we're not getting from the mainstream media. We're not. And once you find yourself in that degree at that point, you have to start looking for answers. And that's what brought me here, personally. But overall, I'm still thinking about other people in that same breath of, aspect.
So I'll ask you the same exact question I asked Nolo, which is, is there, in this time that you've spent being a part of this style of community, or this forum, if you will, is there one specific conspiracy or ideology that really jumps out at you, that you say, man, I really can sink my teeth into this specific subject or this specific thing, where you've spent time or put research into actually finding out or getting to some subject or idea of that specific conspiracy or ideology?
Yeah, actually, it was aliens, because they seem to be everywhere. Everybody's been on YouTube these days. Excuse me, but they're everywhere. And I look at myself, and because I'm engaged in a mixed relation couple. When you actually combine those things, you should be kind of aware of these things, because what's going on with you is not going to always go on with them. So I'm thinking aliens.
But what about it though? What about the alien concept or the alien idea brought you to that?
Well, here was the two, is that, going back, as a kid, you're thinking, yeah, they just, they drop out of the sky, they have saucers and whatnot. No, it's more in depth than that. And that was my key. It was going back to the idea is that we're all here for a purpose. How is that possible? How is these things happening? Because we can't have done this all ourselves. So that was my key.
So was there something specific that you found inside of these stories, or the research that you had done into aliens that made you, something that jumped out at you and said, oh my God, I really need to know something more about this? Or is it just broad? I mean, you're talking about it's just a random concept or idea that, hey, people talk about aliens, and all of a sudden I want to try to find sites that talk about aliens, and then what? And then what happens exactly?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, though, because we talked about this earlier about educational, diversity and whatnot. The fact is that I'm aware of is that the pyramids aren't only 3,000 years old. That's not a fact. That's somebody else talking out there, they're behind when it comes to this stuff, because they've proven with I could pull a video, but that's not really important right now. Those things goes back at least 8,000 years prior to that. Why? Because we've been around for a lot longer than that.
Well, that's very interesting, but what I'm asking, I think that what the listeners are really after is specific. Is there something specific that you can point to that goes, you found a specific hieroglyphic, or you read a specific paper, or you learned something specifically that you went, wow, and this spark went off in your brain that you said, I must know this information, and the only place I seem to get that kind of contact to that information is in this type of a form or in this type of a setting.
Well, right, yeah, I was getting to that because, like I said, I couldn't pull the video down, but the fact is that they were actually able to take time. I mean, they actually took the time to figure out what that meant, and it's like in some kind of crawl space in a pyramid, and for me, that's what caught my eye. Swear to God, because they're a lot older than they say they are. Who's the one? Who's telling people this? They keep coming up with more and more investigative, importance. And then next, you're going like, oh, really?
Yes, but was there something inside of this? I mean, I understand what you're talking about, the construct of the pyramid itself, and yes, it seems very obvious to those who have done research on them that they're much, much older than they claim to be. But was there something about this, looking inside of this specific tunnel, or was there anything that just kind of like jumped out at you and said, well, what the hell? That can't be humanoid in nature. That had to have come, that engineering or that concept or that design had to have come from outside the hominoid thought pattern or the hominoid's intelligence.
Well, you're right on spot on that one, man. It had to do with the fact that there was actually a star map 8,000 years ago that was actually there imprinted, or someone chiseled it out, basically saying this road, or at least this faction of that pyramid, was pointing at that at some point. But it's still 8,000 years older than it really was, that we're told. That's the part I don't get, man.
So this brings me to you, Scarlett. Rush was talking about how he got here by, having taken a look at archaeological finds that, mysteries inside of archaeological finds that obviously science didn't do a very good job of explaining, and thereby, he sees this and visualizes it and say that, hey, I need to find an answer, and then he's drawn into this conspiratorial forum type setting, if you will, looking for answers from outside of the standard science realm, if you will. So we're discussing on this program, this is LOPvox Live with your host, The Ghost Scientist. We're discussing about conspiracy forums, and how our panel of guests here got to this, came about to getting to the conspiracy forums. And my panel of guests today is Nolo, Rush, Scarlett, I.W. Steele, Irie, and Ihanada. And I just want to point this out, like we've gone through Nolo and Rush, so we're at Scarlett right now. So Scarlett, whereabouts, what brought you to this site? What brought you not only to LOP, but to forums such as conspiracy forums?
Well, forums in general. I have to give some background first. When I was in my late teens and early 20s, I was into science fiction fandom. And fans will sit around and talk at conventions, and I heard a lot about aliens. I heard a lot about bits and pieces. I heard a great deal about Jack Parsons and his connection with L. Ron Hubbard and the Babylon working. So we have to cut forward to the net now. And when I first got on the net, I was mostly into going and playing trivia games at trivia sites. But every now and then I would go out and about, and somehow I ended up, and I cannot even remember what the site was, but it was a site with conspiracy topics on it, and I started hopping its links. And I hit a site that was called the Sublime Brotherhood of the Blue Brethren, which isn't up anymore. And it had all this stuff about Jack Parsons and Scientology in its links, and it also had a great deal about the gray aliens and just about any conspiracy that you want to see out there. And I started hopping through his links. And one of them was cyberspace orbit. And just about that time, Kent and Elaine were talking about, Kent was talking about the need for a forum, and Elaine offered to help him with it. And she did put it up for him, and he had a lot of trouble trying to maintain it. It would be up for a little while, and it would crash. So Elaine stepped in and remodified an old site of her daughter's and took it over. And that was Godlike Productions. And I stayed with Godlike Productions until good old Trinity bought the site. And I didn't see eye to eye with him. So we pretty much ended up at Alien Earth. But when you go to one of these sites, eventually you'll find they all interconnect. And you end up at going to all of them and looking around. And it's just a question of finding the most comfortable fit for you. And LOP has been the most comfortable for me for quite a while now. That's how I found out about it all. And I'm interested in anything like that. I'm always interested in a different argument. So it was just great reading for me.
So when you got to, I mean, you started out with the information, and strangely enough, I too have done really a ton of research on Jack Parsons and his connections, especially with the L. Ron Hubbard, the Aleister Crowley, the Madame Blavatsky, going all the way back to John Dee, and back to even going back as far as Geber. So, but how did you get to there? Like, how did you get to that? Like, what made your interest, or what perked your interest in Jack Parsons and the Babylon workings itself?
I had a marriage when I was 18, and my husband told me the story, and actually he did not overlap with Parsons, but he'd been to Parsons' house, and Parsons was also heavily involved in science fiction fandom, which was very underground in those days, and even referred to his home as a slam shack. And it was a place that occultists or science fiction fans could go and crash for a couple of days, and evidently my first husband had done this. You know, so he had told me all this stuff, and I had taken it with a grain of salt. But when I got onto the net and I started running into references to it, it piqued my interest, and that's why I started tracking it down. Incidentally, Yale Laboratories was what Jack Parsons founded, and it used to be referred to as Jack Parsons Laboratory until he left.
Well, yes, and that's actually the original name, even though it's called Jet Propulsion Labs. It actually, from the inside, is referred to as Jack Parsons Labs. But what's interesting about that to me, I mean, from the Jack Parsons from the Jack Parsons idea of this thing was his real heavy involvement in creating others, like-minded others, who created some really interesting theologies. Being L. Ron Hubbard, who was very close to him, being, Aleister Crowley, who was very close to him as well, and Scientology coming out of that, and in fact, some of the basis of the Black Bible and the religions that LaVey and other guys designed and came out with, a lot of that work spanned from Jack Parsons, which was really interesting that he, too, being a very brilliant scientist and engineer, got into the theology side of it, or ended up getting into that theology side of it. So that brings you to this now. That brings you kind of full circle and get into LP now. Is there any specific one that you look at now that you feel that comes forward more than any other one? Like, is there a specific conspiracy or a specific idea or ideology that you read in the forums now that you go, wow, that is, I'm really vested in finding that information out?
I can't really say that, but I suppose the conspiracy that piques me the most, and I've never mentioned it, is how are all these forums interconnected, and how is it that all the people who run them seem to know each other?
That's interesting. You're talking about now, like, the connections between the sites themselves.
Yeah, because you find the same patterns of habits and the same things happen over and over again in all these forums. And I have many of them split off of GLP. Not all of them did. I mean, Above Top Secret was separate. Surfing the Apocalypse was separate. Rumil's News was separate, and they've kind of drifted off. I've lost most of my interest has gone from them. They were all around when GLP was. And then you had a whole host of forums that were spawned by GLP, people who were disaffected with it and went off and started their own forum. But there's always the same mood and pretty much the same people. And sometimes, to some extent, the same administration, and I find that very curious.
Yes, I've actually had that exact experience myself, and I'll go into more detail on that when it comes back around to me. But so that brings me up to IW. We're sitting here, we're having a discussion, and we're talking about conspiracy sites, conspiracy forums, how you got here, what specifically woke you up or opened your eyes to the concept of, hey, these forums exist. They contain information that I'm looking to try to get, and maybe some like-minded people that I can have debates or discussions with. So I'm going to bring it to you. Where are you at? How did you get here? How did you get to this point? What interested you?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, Lop. What brought me here was the Manaconda well blowout. Brought me to the conspiracy sites when they drilled through a crust that was fractured by the meteor strike, and the pressure below it was starting to make it well up. I was looking for information on the internet, and I guess that's how I found it.
So that's how you got into it, or that's kind of like what started you getting involved in conspiracy or conspiracy sites. But what's held your attention? What's kept you here?
Yeah, that's what made me curious about it, and that's how I found it. And what keeps me here is like the alternate thinking. I just see a pattern that a different pattern of thought than the mainstream stuff, and I guess that's what I see.
What's the pattern? Like, what specifically makes the pattern that you're discussing?
Well, it's just a little different than the rest of the mainstream patterns, and you see a lot of creative thinking, and it's just a lot different than some of the other thought trains out there.
So you didn't, basically what you're saying is you didn't believe in what the mainstream media was giving you, or the information that you were getting from mainstream media, so you kind of, if you will, grabbed a hold of the reins and tried to get involved in conspiracy forums, hoping that you'd get some other information that maybe you were looking for?
Yeah, they did have different types of information, and the thing that got me the most was the different, they weren't on the mainstream train of thought, like of how to fix it from well and up. They weren't, there was a bunch of good ideas and that probably wouldn't be accepted by the BP engineers because it was just too expensive and too unfeasible to follow through with. But if it was a dire situation, that it possibly would work.
Absolutely. I wrote several articles for ATS about the BP incident that ended up going viral, actually, and ended up creating a huge debate in and of itself. I mean, that was one of those that I got deeply involved in because of the explanation that was given, and the fact that I had a very good friend of mine who was at the time doing research in the Gulf about the shale what you're talking about is the South Gulf Shale that is about 68 miles off the coast of Florida, starts at that point and goes out in across the ocean floor. And he was doing research on the shale at the time, and right about the time that BP started giving information or putting out information about how this accident took place, I went, well, that's kind of goofy, because at the time I was watching the RV video streams that my buddy had up on his site, as they were actually watching this fissure, this 2-mile long fissure that he was doing research on, that it kept on expanding, and it kept on, he was actually filming it and showing how because of the drilling that was taking place and the methane, the iced methane that was underneath the shell melting because of the drilling mud at 500 degrees that they pumped down into the shell, was expanding at the top surface at roughly 170,000 pounds per square inch. And it was starting to separate this crack out so much that the oil started to seep out of that crack. The petroleum, the crude itself, was seeping out of the crack, and he was filming at the exact same time that this incident takes place, and he was getting ready to publish his findings of the Gulf, of this Gulf research that he was doing, and then all of a sudden the BP oil rig, has an explosion, and the wellhead gets cracked, and all of a sudden the wellhead starts pumping out these, hundreds of thousands of gallons of crude a minute, and then there's this huge public awareness to this now, right about the same exact time that he's getting ready to publish, which I found very interesting. And getting even deeper into that, which I won't because the show isn't about that, but I definitely plan on covering a show about this in the future, by the way, IW, about the information that was given out to the public and the truths behind it, including the corrects at 9527A that they used in that actual spill itself, which is a whole nother conspiracy in and of itself. So, but it's interesting that spawned like your will, if you will, or your drive, if you will, to try to find other like-minded people who are doing the same type of research. I find that very interesting. So is this like, what was the very first site that you went to that you got involved with personally?
I think the link was on Godlike Productions, but it has since been deleted. But what concerned me was the meteor strike fractured the mantle in that area. And if you drill through a fractured mantle as opposed to a monolithic mantle that hasn't been fractured, it's a lot more apt for the pressure below it to just make it boil up and blow out, right? So that was what concerned me.
Well, and absolutely, and the fact that the MSM actually kept it out of, like, the MSM itself kept it away from the public. They never even said that, hey, the real reason why this fracture, this fissure that we're seeing, or this fractured fissure that we're seeing, was actually caused by this meteor hitting the shell, the top of the shell, and then cracking it, and then you have a drilling of this, and then pumping in, not only pumping in hot drilling mud at over 500 degrees, but pumping in hot drilling mud over 500 degrees in a shell that has a rather extensive, large frozen methane floor inside the shell itself, you know, and they never really came forward to say anything to the public that was the case, or to even show how that ecosystem itself, or the geological system, if you will, even operated. That to me was rather disheartening, because you had the public listening to the mass media who was giving them the information, and the information that was being given wasn't the facts, and they didn't even know that this happened, that this even occurred, that this strike, this specific strike you're talking about, even occurred. I mean, it's not like it was general knowledge unless you were in the research side, or unless you knew somebody doing research in it.
I would also like to say that part of the Gulf this is projection, but it probably is part of New Madrid. It probably extends down into the Gulf, you know, and anything you fool with on that can set that off. Now, it's unlikely, but it's possible, and there are a lot of major cities upstream from New Orleans that would be really devastated by that. So they don't want to start panic, and they don't want speculation like I just made. So they stay very quiet, and they try to keep it isolated, and this is just a failed well. But it's obvious it's not that simple. There was a 6.5 in the Gulf, I think, last year, you know, that everyone knew about, but there wasn't much said about it because it was very deep in the Gulf and it didn't affect anything. But it's disturbing when you look at the overall pattern.
Well, we think and the reason for that, Scarlett, is because actually, in actuality, we believe that the vent system, that shell that's been created, this underground bubble underneath the ocean floor in the Gulf, is actually a vent for the supervolcano that exists in Yellowstone National Park. That this is actually a vent out, if you will, a pressurization valve to drop the pressures that are actually in Yellowstone. So if you see how these fingerlings, these little vent areas that leave Yellowstone National Park go outward along the ring of fire, it actually makes very good sense that specific shell that's there, and at least the research that's been done by Jacques Cousteau Jr. and several prominent oceanographers and geologists who have done surveys on it, all tend to believe that this particular shell that sits there is a vent from the Yellowstone supervolcano, which of course is underground and not above ground. And it made perfect sense to the reasons why you started seeing the gasification of the top of the shell and the pressurization, or the pressures that were being created at the top of the shell itself.
When you talk about Yellowstone, that's another thing that I hadn't researched into its connection with the Gulf, but what I find interesting is you have another supervolcano over in Mono Lake, California. And it seems to me that the Yellowstone energy is transferring over to the West Coast. It's transferring over to Mono Lake. And what I can point to say this is suspicious is the fact that earthquakes in Nevada and Utah have increased, and they're in line with that. So when you have these supervolcanoes, they're gigantic, deep hydraulic systems, and scientists won't acknowledge that they're connected until basically their nose is rubbed in it. But it seems really obvious to me that Yellowstone and the California systems are connected, and I could believe at a very deep level, yes, it could go all the way to the Gulf, because that is a huge volcano, and they're just still studying and learning about it.
Well, which brings up a point, is that chain, if you will, of the way that in which the vents are designed, especially the one that goes out along the Barren Straits. There's a very large one that they've been doing research on now, because they've been taking a look at the venting case, because it's starting to swell as well. They're starting to see a swell on the ocean floor. And they believe that one, again, is another vent or another underground vent to the Yellowstone supervolcano. And it seems to be tied together, especially when you see reactions. If you're watching, used to be, they took it down about 2.5 years ago. They took this site down, but there was a really good seismographic site that you could go on to that had all the seismographs. So they had all the seismographs in Yellowstone National Park. And if you watched one vent, like say, for example, if you watched one of the volcanoes vent, you could backtrack it to seismic activity that was actually taking place in Yellowstone, and to specific ones, actually. And there was a researcher out of the University of Texas, at UTEX, that was following along with this. I believe one of them was Dr. Bonnie O'Neill, that was doing some research on this and was trying to correlate the seismic activity that was taking place at Yellowstone and the effects of that, or seeing the effects of that in volcanic venting around the world. That the concept became that you had 4 or 5 of these specific super volcanoes, if you will, that are all interconnected underneath in a geological standpoint, that when one gives off pressure, the other one is like having, basically pimples on the surface of the planet. So that's interesting. I think that would make a really good program, or a really good show to cover as well. So is there anything like IW, like now that I get back around that you've discussed like what brought you to here, which was the Gulf incident, what exactly, like, is there a specific one in modern times now that you've read or you've gotten into or you've delved into research in that you think would be, like just you believe in, or something you think that holds water?
No, not really. It's just all the crazy feels in general I get from the thoughts.
So that brings me around to you, Irie. Here we are. We're going full circle here, getting towards the bottom of the hour here on LOPvox Live with your host, The Ghost Scientist, and we were discussing about conspiracy sites, and what drove our panel members to come onto a conspiracy site or get involved in a conspiracy site, such as Lunatic Outpost, such as this site here, and the one that hosts this specific radio show. So, Irie, what brought you here? How did you get around to here? Irie, we're up to you now as part of our panel here. What brought you here to to LOPvox or to LOP or to Lunatic Outpost in general?
Yeah, I guess what brought me here was early on. I'm older, so 70s and 80s. I guess conspiracies were National Enquirer, and things like that. So I used to laugh at a lot of it, and then 911 happened. And really, my background is I'm a metallurgical engineer, so I decided to study what happened, look at the samples, and it didn't take me very long to figure out that thermate was used, because I was a metallurgist working on thermite and thermate explosive aluminum industry. And for a period of time, I got involved with 911 Truth, Dr. Jones, MIT researchers, and so I ended up at ATS, and I kind of had an open mind to all things, but mostly scientific, and that's how I ended up at conspiracy sites, and eventually I ended up at LOP.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to LOPvox Live with your host, The Ghost Scientist. We're here discussing about conspiracy theories, and how our panel of guests got here or came about to getting involved in conspiracy sites, or in what I think, what they were looking for, like what sparked their travel or their journey, if you will, that got them to come to a conspiracy site. And that brings me to Ahanada. Ahanada, what brought you here to a site such as Lunatic Outpost and to LOPvox Live?
Aha's lost her sound.
Yeah, right. So tell us where you see conspiracy headed in the future.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was directed at me. The way I see things right now, that's the difficult part, because everybody's going to face that differently. But overall, it's not looking too good. I don't see myself being dropped out of, my meters or something like that. Not yet. There's way too much stuff going on, literally, that we're not even, aware of. And that's the stuff that scares me the most. And going back to what Ghost was saying, that's what brought me here in the first place. Because there's so much going on that we don't even know what's really happening. But we've learned enough, because there's a lot of great people out there that do this stuff because they care about this thing. That's you got to give it volume.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to LOPvox Live with your host, The Ghost Scientist. Thank you for joining us back. We were having some difficulties of the show, and we were having some sound audio difficulties. We apologize about that, but it seems like we're back here again. And the discussion of the panel today is about conspiracy theories, how our panel members and our panel of guests today, comprised of Nolo, Rush, Scarlett, IW, and myself, who will be discussing about how we came to a conspiracy site, how we, what sparked our interest, what led us to the space that we're at now, which is Lunatic Outpost, and it's specifically LOPvox Live and the creation of the show itself, which I think the listeners would find very interesting, and some things that I think that they can sink their teeth into as far as the information that's given. So here we started out the show with Nolo and Nolo discussing the fact that what he saw in conspiracies, specifically what drew him to his conspiracy sites, was from a theological angle. He was doing theological study. He found it very interesting that a lot of these studies also the study that he was doing pointed towards conspiracy and conspiracy mysteries, if you will, that drew him in to take a look at what other ideas or what other people's research they were writing about, the things that they were publishing, and kind of brought him to the mix of getting started with the initial stages of GLP and the GLP site itself, and then, of course, leading him into Lunatic Outpost. And then we discussed with Rush and how he got to this point and his studies and what brought him to here. And then Scarlett, who originally got started in this, if you would, through her ex, who she was once with, who was very involved in the Jack Parsons ideas and Jack Parsons concepts and the things that he was writing and his theology, if you will, that he was writing about, that brought about people like L. Ron Hubbard and putting forward the workings of Babylon. And just to point that out, if you're really interested in the Babylon working stuff, you might want to check out some of William Cooper's works. William Cooper, who, of course, Bill Cooper, who was the host of The Hour of Our Time, which was an AM broadcast that went nationwide. It kind of spawned the C2C crowd, or with the Coast to Coast crowd, with originally started out as kind of this same kind of thing, like LOPvox Live. It was a discussion, a discussion with a host that was talking about different types of conspiracies, different types of mysteries that people were writing about, books that they were writing about, articles that they were writing about, and putting them live on air. And of course, then George Norrie taking over and covering a lot of the ideas that they had. and then drawing from that, you had sites such as the original starting of GLP, and then ATS, and then the Channy Project, and Lunatic Outpost, and other sites like these. And then Steele, who his real focus, what brought him to here, or what brought him to the Lunatic Outpost crowd, and of course the conspiracy crowds themselves, was his research that he had been doing on the Gulf of Mexico and the BP incident, and the information that was withheld from the public, if you want to say this, the information that was held from the public about that specific incident. And this brings me to the now, and of course I was asking them, all of our panel members that are guests of the show, about what they felt current conspiracy, or what they were really interested in now, the things that they think that really bring interest to sites such as Lunatic Outpost, such as listening to programs like ours, this being LOPvox Live, which you're listening to now, and on this radio broadcast or this radio program. And me, I'd like to, I'm at the end here, so I'd like to kind of tail it off as far as what brought me to these type of sites. I have kind of a strange story, actually. It all started out when I was very young. I'm a full-blooded Blackfoot Sioux, Lakota Sioux, and because of my background as a child, because of my background as a kid, I spent a lot of time with my grandfather's brother, my great uncle, who was a shaman. He was the shaman of our tribe, and he really was more about nature, Gaia, the study of Gaia, the study of the planet as a living organism, as a living, breathing thing. And I learned about our specific history, the specific history of our tribe, our true history that, of course, the public never got to see because of the change, the transition, if you will, of the winners, being that of the Anglo-Saxon Protestants who came here and basically pushed our tribe to the northern portion of Montana, and the majority of which is in Canada at this time. I never went to school. I never went through a public school, if you will. We didn't have a schoolhouse. You didn't get up in the morning and go to a school to learn. We actually went to school over a radio, over a shortwave radio, and what was picked up by a longwave radio that was actually out of Kalispell from their school district. And we would sit at our kitchen table, and you had to go through these classes, these courses, if you will, that came over the radio. And they would send our work to the res, and the reservation itself would then give out the work out to the kids that were living on the reservation at the time. And you just basically, so my family had a rule. Our family was very tight-knit. All of us lived on the same land and on the same ranch and in the same ranch house. And we all, no matter what child, there was 13 of us as kids, 13 kids living in the house, and we all had to sit at the kitchen table starting in the morning, and we had to sit through every single one of the course studies, or the course classes, if you will, and it didn't matter what grade you were in. You just had to, they would start out with the younger kids first, and they would go through their classes, and then it would move to the middle school kids, and then to the high school kids, and then, and of course, the last being that of the 12th grade lessons that they were teaching, but you had to sit there the whole entire time. So in 1989, they put forward a test. The United States government decided that they were going to test the Native American children of the tribes themselves to see where in education they sat inside the education system in North America. And the test that they put forward was called the Cattell A+B exam, which you're welcome to do some research on and look it up. It's quite an extensive test that's given, with lots of different questions, and it covers all different aspects or genres of education, if you will, not only from a scholastic standpoint, but from an understanding, like how you learn, the ways in which you learn, the type of learning that you do. So as a child, I actually ended up getting into this into my career as a mistake, if you will. I don't know really if you want to call it a mistake. My great uncle once said that it was just the way things worked out, like it was meant to be, if you will. So, but the test was actually only for seniors. The test was supposed to be given to just the seniors. But my father had a rule. If something came in the mail that was for schoolwork, you would get up in the morning and he would put all of our schoolwork on the table, and you open your packet up and you'd start doing your work that was for that day, for that specific day. And it just so happens I was the first one out of bed, went downstairs and started taking this test, taking this Cattell A plus B exam, because I just thought it was the thing to do. I thought that was what I was supposed to do according to my father and his rules of the house. So I took the test, put it back in an envelope, and of course, my father would get up and they would mail it out every Friday evening. We would do our work through the whole week from Monday through Friday. He would mail it off to the scholastic system, and they would then test all of our, grade all of our tests and all of our papers and everything, and then they would be sent back to us. Well, I took the test, and the next thing I know, I was out fishing, actually. I went down to the Flathead River, and I was fishing down at the Flathead River, and I was walking back home, and when I got back home, there was a green LTD sitting in the driveway with governmental plates on it and governmental emblems on the side of the doors, and I walked in the house, and I could hear my father in this heated debate with somebody inside the house, and we lived way out in the middle of nowhere, so this wasn't normal. I mean, our closest neighbor lived 36 miles away from us, to give you an idea of how secluded the ranch is that we lived, or our family ranch was. So it was really strange to me seeing this car sitting in the driveway. It was very odd to me to see this automobile, because I'd never seen it before. And when I got inside the house, there was this gentleman. He was in a uniform. He was a lieutenant, along with this lady that was really nicely dressed, and she had a clipboard and everything. And she's having a debate, and my brother Joe, who's the oldest son in our family, and my older brother, who was in a chair, and he's being grilled about this particular thing. And my brother's saying, no, I never took this test, and these people trying to find out who did take the test, and my father, basically berating my brother, saying, if you really did take this thing, you need to say something. Meanwhile, I'm listening to their conversation and realizing, hey, what test are you talking about? So I'm trying to get my dad's attention, and at the same time, I'm having a conversation saying, hey, I took this test, and they're looking at me because at that time I was young, and they didn't think that somebody of my age who took that specific test. I didn't realize what the problem was. I was like, I took the test. What's the problem? And so by the time that we finally got to this, and my father said, did you do this? And I said, yes. I said, Dad, I took the test. What's the problem? And he's saying, well, there's no problem. The lady spoke up, and she said, I'm from the scholastic from the school board, and we got a test, and we were just trying to figure out how this test was taken, because they were trying to claim that he cheated. My brother cheated on the test. And my father is in the meantime trying to tell them how this cheating didn't take place. We don't have access to books. We don't have access to a library. We don't have access to going to schools. So, in the meantime, they're saying, well, you're too young. You couldn't have taken the test, et cetera, et cetera. Well, at that age, at that time period, when I took the test, what they wanted to do is retest. And I said, fine. I'm all for that. My father said, my son will retake it for you. And so they sat down, and they had this basically like a typewriter type thing with a card, manila cards that you put in the machine, and he asked these questions. He just went through a series of questions, and I had to punch which one of the answers that I was giving. And I had a piece of paper and a little pencil and was writing down my answers and all this kind of stuff, and I took the test. Well, needless to say, at the end of this exam, they took the cards back, and they, of course, left. My father was in an uproar about the fact of, these people even showing up to our house, and in the way in which they showed up to our house. And he had concerns. He was concerned because I'm his son, and I'm his child, et cetera, and he was really concerned about the situation. Well, the next this about 3 days elapses. We think everything's fine, nothing's changed, all these different things haven't taken place. No one's contacted us. Next thing we know, that this same person, the same lieutenant, shows up to the house, and he's having a conversation with my dad. And my dad comes to me and says, son, they want to put you in a special school. And I said, well, what do you mean, Dad? What is this about? And he said, well, they believe that you should be placed in the school, and they're willing to put you in and take care of you, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, understand, my family was extremely poor. We came from a reservation my family made their income by wood, by cutting wood, logging wood. We were in the logging industry. We actually had perch-in horses where you would go up on the mountain, on Huckleberry Mountain and Blueberry Mountain, and cut the wood up there, and then the horses would drag them down. We'd take them down to the sawmill, and we sold the lumber off of our land. So, for them to tell my father, hey, you're going to get a chance to go to this school, and we're going to fund it, and you don't have to pay for it, et cetera, et cetera. We would definitely, my family was like, you should take this opportunity. You should go ahead and we should put you into this school and give you the opportunity, because my dad was looking at this. So my dad was looking at this as, if you get into this thing, you have an opportunity to go to college, because they're talking to him about going to school. And once you got through the school, we would pay for his college. We would get him in the service and sign him in the military, and he would be part of this group, and et cetera, et cetera. And it was a really great opportunity at the time. And of course, understand that from my standpoint of it, I was young, I was naive, I didn't really understand what was going on, because never had that type of experience before, or had any experience with this type of setup. So it was strange. It was really odd to me to be taken out of my family's group, or my family tribe, if you will, and then taken out and put into this type of a system. So the school that I ended up going to is called the U.S. School of Americas. It was on Fort Benning, Georgia. Went to school at U.S. School of Americas. Was there training with them and back and forth, and of course, as a young kid, you're getting these professors that are coming from all types of different universities to teach you different courses, and you went through this study, through all these different studies, through really, detailed, odd tests, if you will, and then as I got done with that. Then I got put into, when I turned 17, my father signed the paperwork to put me in the United States military, ended up going into the U.S. Army, became a science officer with 1st SFODD, worked directly in the organization of DARPA, headed up by NRO, got involved in all kinds of projects. In 92, the end part of 92, I ended up getting involved in a project called Project Calypso, that started raising some eyebrows of the public, because of some of the parents that were involved in that specific project. They were complaining about their kids, of course, writing to their parents, and then all of a sudden their letters stopped, and then the parents started writing to senators, and the senators got involved, and they basically disbanded the U.S. School of Americas in 1996. They closed the facility, took it off of Fort Benning, Georgia. And then from that point, after that took place, and I was working on Project Calypso at the time, this brought me up to like around 98, 99, while working on this specific project. There was 185 scientists that started this project. All of us were working towards, it was very compartmentalized. There was specific groups, 5-man teams inside of these groups that had specifics to do, and we were doing reverse engineering of technologies, foreign technologies, which is what was told to us. And we had to disseminate part of our job inside the scientific core of the group. Our job was to disseminate and read through the information that was given to us directly from the DoD, from the Defense Department itself, and then from the Department of Energy. And the majority of the things we were getting were things that looked like patents, that were designs, like engineering designs, engineering blueprints, technologies that, and these papers were really old. Some of them over 200 years of age. Some of them that had been, sent off to be published or to go after a patent, after a government patent that ended up in the patent office that never ended up getting a patent, which we call NSA stamping, where it got a national security stamp to it. We had to go through that paperwork and figure out the reverse engineering of those technologies to see if there was any military value to those technologies. Was there any way to take those patent designs that were sent into that patent office and turn them into viable military strategic technologies, if you will? So in 2002, well, before that time, one of the projects that Project Calypso that I'm talking about actually got pretty big out in the public, because number one, in '94, one of the scientists that was working on the team got out and gave the story to somebody in Hollywood. They turned it into a movie called Chain Reaction. They specifically talked about the project itself being Project Calypso. Of course, they made it into a theatrical thing where it was more nonsense than reality, but a lot of the technology that was discussed in the film was actually real technology that we were working on in Calypso. And the government got scared about it. The DoD, Department of Defense, Department of Energy got really worried about that specific project, and they ended up putting everybody on a ghost list. And what a ghost list means is they basically started eliminating everybody. And out of 185 scientists, by the end of 2003, there were only about 19 of us that were still alive that hadn't gone through some mysterious death or some mysterious suicide, if you will. And then by when that all started taking place, I had a very good friend of mine who, not unlike Steele, was a metallurgist. He was actually a molecular engineer. He designed materials for specific applications. His name was Jamie, and Jamie was a brilliant kid. He was, very smart, well spoken. Very into his field, and he understood materials like no other person you could ever meet. And Jamie was concerned about what was happening because of the elimination of the teams that we were part of. Because of them being eliminated, because of the circumstances, he decided that he was going to go public. So he had contacted some journalists, some investigative journalists, and he was in talks with them. And at the same time, he was in talks with me and several other people saying, hey, I really want to get this information out to the public. I'm very worried about my own and my family's safety. He went home to Little Sturgis, Kentucky, and decided he was going to go home, talk to his mother, and then afterwards he was going to be meeting with this journalist. Well, the day that he went home, he got on his bike. He was leaving to go down to meet with this journalist, and he ended up dead 30 feet from his mother's driveway. And, of course, when I got the phone call from his mother, Michelle said, hey, Jamie's dead. I just want you to know about it. And I flipped. I was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? I just spoke to him on the phone. And she said, well, he was on his bike, and somehow he lost control of the bike going out of the driveway, and he flew 80 feet through the air and hit the back of his head up against a concrete culvert that was in the ditch, and it caved in the back of his helmet, caved in his head, killed him instantly. So by the time we get finished, by the time she finishes this phone call, she says, will you please come here? Because you're his best friend, would you please come here and have a conversation with me personally about the situation? And she said, I would like somebody to go pick up his bike at impound because I don't want to see it. And she was very distraught, as you can imagine. So I went to the impound. I get there. I meet with Michelle. She hands me the keys to the bike. I go down, and I've got the slip that the police department had given her to get the bike out of impound. I go down to the impound station, and of course we brought a trailer to put this bike on because we expected the bike would be completely totaled. And the guy says, well, are you going to drive the bike home? And I told the guy, I said, well, what do you mean? Well, am I going to drive the bike home? How am I driving this bike home? This guy flew 80 feet through the air. The bike is totaled. He said, no, it's not totaled at all. It's sitting right over there. Now, when I saw the bike and I noticed that the only thing wrong with this bike was the fact that the light, the turn signal on the back of the motorcycle was the only thing that was busted. It was the only thing that was broken. And the right side of the bike had some scratches on the tank and down the pipes, and that was basically it. The bike was fully intact. But yet, Jamie flew 80 feet through the air, hit the ditch, hit a concrete pylon, this concrete culvert that's in the ground, and it literally caved in the back of a Bell helmet, motorcycle helmet, .3, that crushed the whole back of the helmet, crushed in the back of his head. So when I saw that, I just knew right then and there, I have got to get out of this. I've got to get out of this certain situation. And I had friends at that time that were part of the scientific community that I was working with, that I was having talks with and conversations with about this particular incident and about the work that we were already working on of Tonopah and several other locations that I was working in. And I said, I need to separate myself from this. So I decided to jump the reservation. That's what we call it, jumping the reservation. So I jumped off the reservation and went incognito. And at the same time was having talks to try to figure out how to separate myself from the work that I was doing and do it in such a way that I wasn't going to be in real danger, if you will, because of the situation. So in 2002, when this whole entire thing kind of takes place, I decided, along with several other researchers that I was talking to, that I would put together a series of lectures, and I would go out and meet with the public at large, the scientific community at large, and tell them and give them information to what kind of work we were working on, because I felt if the information got out to people, if the information made it to the public, that it would bring safety to all of us that happen to be working on these specific projects. Now, I understand there's a lot more detail to this, and unfortunately, there were a lot of professors that were involved in this, mainline professors that were involved in the project, that ended up being murdered over this particular incident. And when I traveled around, I ended up doing a lecture. I was at the Hilton in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, doing a talk. I had just finished the talk. It was about 10:30. Went to the bar across the street. I was going to listen to some live music that happened to be on. Went to the bar, had a beer, was listening to the band play there. It was about probably 1:15, 1:20 when I left. And I had the minute I walked outside of the bar, there was me and maybe two other people that were inside, the bartender and another guy that happened to be hanging out there. And I was going to walk back across the street to the hotel. And the minute I walked outside of this bar, I got a bag put over the top of my head, and I got thrown in the back of this pickup truck. And as this pickup truck is going, I'm getting beat up. They drive me out in the middle of nowhere in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, in the middle of nowhere to this cornfield. Excuse me. They shot me in the side. They got shot in the left-hand side. They threw me out of the back of the truck into this ditch, and basically left me for dead. And I heard one of them say that cocksucker's got to be dead. So they drove off, and unfortunately, or fortunately for me, I wasn't. Unfortunate for them, but fortunate for me, I wasn't. I had crawled to a farmhouse and had made it to a farmhouse and knocked on the door, and the guy answers, and he's like, "You're the bloodiest thing I've ever seen, kid," and et cetera, et cetera. And I asked him, please don't contact any authorities. I'll clean myself up. All I need to do is get back to my hotel room. So they took me back. He put me in his pickup truck, put plastic down on the front seat, drove me to the damn hotel, dropped me off. I got in there and started cleaning myself up and patched myself up pretty good with some super glue and duct tape, which worked out very well, by the way. By the time this all takes place, I'm making phone calls and contacting people that I had already been in contact with, told them what the incident that took place and what had happened to me. And they basically said, we're going to get you into our underground and we'll get you out of this situation. Now, that led me to wanting to get information out to the public. I wanted to write and tell people about what was going on, the work that we were performing, the reverse engineering stuff that we were working on, the technologies that were being brought forward, and several of the FM manuals or the field manuals that we were writing and strategically reading inside of this project, inside of this specific project, and started writing about it. And lo and behold, the first place I ended up was ATS. I started writing at ATS, wrote for ATS for quite some time, until I had a pretty major falling out towards the end of the BP incident that took place because of some of the information I was writing about on the BP incidents, and then as well as there was a young kid who had gotten on ATS. His name was Gentle, and he was writing about 13-year-old kid creates time machine, and it was very brilliant, some of the stuff that this kid was writing, but they've just they just lambasted him. I mean, just beat him up, like beat him silly over what he was talking about, and I thought that was very, very wrong of them. And then that moved me from moving ATS, yes, and from moving ATS over to GLP, and then I ended up at GLP, was kind of followed everything that was going on at GLP, had several talks with Jason, and of course had it out with Jason at one time and said, I've had enough of you, this is complete nonsense. Ended up moving on to the Channy Project, and then was at the Channy Project for about 6 months, going back and forth and talking to different people, and I ended up meeting lots of really, really intelligent people there, and at the same time writing about what I was still working on, the technology that I was forming, the technology that I was designing and working out to get out to the public. And then I don't know, there was something about the Channy Project site that just didn't do it for me. And I had somebody mention to me, you should check out LOP. You should check out Lunatic Outpost, because I think that you'll be very interested in, not only the way in which it's made, but the way in which the people come out, like the way in which the members of LOP put their information out, and they're very open to everything. So that sounds great. So I checked out LOP. Next thing I know, I'm here at Lunatic Outpost for the last 3+ years, and been going pretty strong ever since. And I stayed pretty quiet, actually, because I wanted to know. First off, I didn't want to put out a lot of information right off the bat. I didn't want anybody to know who I was, number one, because I'd written books and all kinds of stuff. And in fact, several of the audio, radio stuff that I've done, I've always said, if you think you know who I am, don't say anything. If you know me, don't say anything. If you want information, don't ask, et cetera, because I just didn't want it. I didn't want to have the same experiences I had with ATS and with GLP and with the Channy. I wanted a completely different experience here at LOP. So, and I think I found that with this, and then as I got through the process and started realizing, hey, this is a really good forum, there's some very intelligent people, and there's some things to talk about, it got me excited about, number one, my New Year's resolution being I wanted to create a radio program. I had done radio in the past. In fact, I've been one of the guests on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. I've been on there several times, in fact, and I've done other shows for other mainline shows, including The Hour of Our Time with William Cooper and several other ones, and wanted to take that kind of genre because I saw something that was missing, something that wasn't done, and I wanted to fit a niche market or design a show, if you will, around a niche market, that being a panel-style discussion, which has never really been done, which brought us to the concept of talking about LOPvox Live and the design of LOPvox Live, and thank you to Nolo for naming it. I think it's a genius name, by the way, Nolo. And that brought me to this. And the one, I think the conspiracy that still gets me as a theorist myself, as a writer, as a scientist, et cetera, the one that gets me is the one I talked to in the last program, that being that of Operation Garden Plot and Project Bluebeam, specifically because I was involved in those projects and I understood how the public viewed those specific projects, and the fact that a lot of the public still does not understand it. So I think that's the one that I stick to now, because it's the one that, first off, I believe people should know about. Secondly, I think people should really have a better understanding of it. And then that gets us to the end of this whole entire, program, if you will, about how our panel members, including myself and everybody else, including Nolo, Rush, Scarlett, IW, and myself, got to this point of coming to LOPvox or coming to LOPvox Live and becoming panel members of LOPvox Live and to becoming members of Lunatic Outpost here at LOP Radio. And now I'd like to open up to the panel. I think before we move out of this and I segment out of the show itself and leave you listeners basically chomping at the bit to get more information, I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to open up to the panel and ask first Nolo if he has any specific questions that he would like to ask of the panel itself.
I have this is related to Aha here, who's having technical difficulties. She had a question about your special schools. Was it just a single special school? And also, did you get to pick your own curriculum?
No, actually I did not. The way in which it was designed was we first were brought up to Dansville, New York, to this facility that was actually under what they call the castle in upstate New York, and you sat in basically like a schoolroom there, and the first part of it was a visual test, a visual exam. You sat in a chair, they flashed all kinds of images up on the screen, and then you had to write a synopsis of what it was that you were looking at. And then the next part of it was an audible thing where you sat down and they went through a series of sounds, like sound recordings, if you will, and you listened to those recordings, and then you wrote what you heard or what you were hearing from them. And then the last part of that exam was they put you in a room with a bunch of different things on a table, all these different objects, and everything from sprockets to pieces of metal to different things. And what they asked you was try to come up with something out of what you see on the table, like build something that you're looking at, like what you see on the table, use what's there, utilize it to build something specifically. And then after that, they placed you within a specific field. And then when you got placed in that specific field, then you got sectioned into tinier groups, like smaller, segregated groups, if you will, to keep everybody compartmentalized so that nobody knew what the other groups were working on. And they basically utilized you like that. Well, they utilized me like that all the way until I resigned my commission in 2003 when I said I had had enough of this and jumped reservation. It basically worked like that for the whole time. You never knew what the group is that was next to you, what they were working on, just like you were working on a specific thing and no one knew what it was that you were working on. So the school that I ended up going to, that first one was Dansville, the test center up there. The second one was the U.S. School of Americas. And then after I finished at the U.S. School of Americas, I went through the Military Officers Training Academy at MIT and did most of my mainline studies at MIT, if you will, with a liaison, a public liaison. And our public liaison was actually a gentleman by the name of Eugene Maloff. And he headed up the team. He actually headed up the professor team that was doing most of the studies that we were working on, or most of the stuff that we had worked on. And then, unfortunately, Gene actually was murdered in his mother's house in 2004 while he was still on a radio program, by the way, which was very sad. And I was very, very close to Gene. But the schools, there was all kinds of different things. I traveled all over the world, got to train with lots of different facilities, lots of different people, lots of different instructors, everything from, I spent time in the Philippines, Thailand, Japan, Malaysia, was up on Mount Kinabalu for a very long time training up there. So there were a lot of different schools that I was attending, a lot of different training that I was attending through the process. And then also I was instructing as well, because I became an instructor, started teaching in the National Academy down in Granada, Mississippi, et cetera, et cetera. So, it was not just me going through classes, also I was teaching a lot of these different groups, a lot of the different groups, and leading them.
Okay, thank you. This is more a question from me. You were, how shall I phrase this? You've been around the block, so to speak. So you've had experience not only on conspiracy sites, you've been actually involved in conspiracy, so to speak, things. We were kind of discussing how we got involved with conspiracy sites, but kind of sub rosa to that is, obviously, if we're involved, we're not wasting our time. It seems effective in some kind of way, or potentially effective. I'm wondering your thoughts on that, since you've seen quite a bit, and you talked about, doing the lecture circuit, wanting to get your information out there. How do you see conspiracy sites as being effective, reaching society, perhaps changing society? In other words, does it work? Is it doing it for you?
No, and I think it depends on, and I say no with some vigor, by the way. I think it depends on the aspect of which you're talking about getting information out to the public. What I find is, especially from having been around the block and having conversations with not only some of the directors at ATS, I think what first clued me in that the majority of these sites are government ops. Whether people want to believe that or not, it makes no difference to me whatsoever. I've had firsthand experience with it. I've had conversations with directors, people who are in charge of these sites, had talks with them specifically. And when you're asking about some of the things that they're keeping away from the public, the things that they end up banning or the things that they end up modding, if you will, it seems as if you looked at across the board, just like what Scarlett was saying, where they all seem to have the same kind of administration, they all seem to have the same kind of setup. I think that specifically there's a reason for that. I think that they're in some fashion, some way or form, it's control, and they're controlling this mix of information. And I will tell you this from a fact, by the way. Because of the group that I ran with some very specific, and I'll bring this up for instance, okay, because the gentleman is no longer with us. Dr. Brian O'Leary was a very close friend of mine. I worked with him. I worked with him way before he ever went down to Ecuador and created his lab in Ecuador. I worked with him back and forth between the United States and Ecuador. I've worked with John Hutchinson. I've worked with several other guys, John Lair, and a bunch of other ones through the years. And having dealt with them and understanding the things that they've had to deal with, Brian was one of those, we used to come as part of these sites, okay? Our group used to come onto these sites. And we'd make up names and we'd start, listening to, and we were specifically looking at what you guys were all looking at. What is the stuff that you're reading? And we would see the things that were written about us and specifically, or writing about us, or the things that we said, or the things we didn't say, et cetera, et cetera. And we noticed a pattern that was created, which is, even if you were the one, like, say, for example, people who thought they knew who I was and they were discussing about me or they were discussing about my work, I would write back and, try to fix what they were saying. And they would be like, oh, no, I know this guy personally, et cetera, and here they are, they're talking to me, but they never knew it was me. And I know for a fact, John Hutchinson, John Lair, myself, Brian O'Leary, Pi, in fact, all these guys we were all doing it at the same time. We're all getting on there and writing on as somebody else and having conversations. So I know that those type of people come to these type of sites and we discuss it. And I think more from a standpoint, we wanted to know how our work or what we were doing was being presented to the public, if you will, and then also how what their concepts and their ideas about it was. But I still see it from the outside looking in, as there's a control factor that you don't see. There's a hand behind the wheel turning and cranking the sprocket, if you will, if you understand what I mean.
Very good. I'd be interested in hearing Rush's opinion on this. The same sort of question. Rush, where do you see conspiracy sites going? Are they effective? Do you see an overall purpose for them? Do you see that, would anybody miss them if they disappeared off the face of the earth?
Well, I'll take that last question first because, yes, I think there's so many people that are so engaged that really kind of need this aspect because we're still reaching out constantly. And I don't know about you guys, but I am myself. And I know Ghost, who is so adamant about a lot of things he was pointing out, too. Yeah, there's a necessity for places like this. And I know there's more. I'm aware of those. But where do I find myself personally? Here's one point. But for overall, though, if what we're really looking at is people looking to know what the hell is happening behind the scenes. Because, yeah, I don't know about you, Yahoo, TMZ, some of those places that you're going like, are you kidding me? These places aren't where people are really supposed to be at. So, yeah, I'm very adamant about, the people I do come in contact with, they know about this place. They know about you guys. And they should be more aware than most because they actually care about that stuff. Because, you can't lead a dead horse to water, right?
Well, you can't leave a dead horse to water, but what you can do is you can put the water in front of them and give them the opportunity to drink. And I think that's what these conspiracy sites, these type of conspiracy sites do, is that it allows you to put the water in front of the horse and then give the horse the opportunity to drink it. Whether or not they drink it is on them.
Well, that's true. That was my dead horse theory because so many people are so adamant about doing things that they surprise me. That's fine. But when you come across people that you try to explain something within detail, especially when we're talking about things that we do talk about around here, they're clueless. And now, do you feel bad because they don't get the point?
To say that people here are clueless, I think a lot of us are not clueless. I think a lot of us are very careful in what we say, and I think a lot of people put on masks for that purpose.
Well, and I also think it comes down to that it's not, I always say this, ignorance is truly bliss, but you have to understand the definition of ignorance. Ignorance is a lack of knowledge. It's not because you're an idiot or you're retarded. It's just simply that you don't have the knowledge or you've never been given that specific knowledge. So you have to allow people the opportunity to get access to it, if you will, the information, whatever that information happens to be. And you can't hold it against them if they don't have it, meaning you can't belittle somebody or put somebody down, just like earlier before this broadcast began, the conversation that I was having with Fribler, I think is his name, because you can't belittle that kind of thing because they don't have the information. So I don't hold it against them. I'll give them every opportunity. Excuse me very much, folks. I'll give them every opportunity there is to get a chance to read the information, and then it's open for debate. But if you don't have the total information involved in it, or if you don't have the total information of a specific subject, you can neither debate it or argue it outside of your own belief. And I think that's where the problem begins in this type of a forum or this type of an atmosphere. People don't give others the opportunity to learn, if you will, or get educated, if you will, in the specific information that they're trying to put out.
I don't know if it's engineered or not, but there's a lot of so-called competition between the forums or inter-scene warfare of some sort or another, where it's like the sites are in competition with one another, and yet supposedly we're all on the same page as far as we need to find out and uncover what's really going on, so to speak. And I think that does kind of have the footprint of being engineered and all being stirred and herded in a direction of misinformation, perhaps. I don't know. And so I'm myself personally, I'm surprised how much does get out there in spite of whatever internal misdirections are being planted among us, or whatever so-called site warfare that goes on, or all of those sorts of things. We can still, there's nuggets getting out there, and for that I keep on hanging on, and I keep on reading the forums and participating somewhat. Although my field's a little bit more narrowed than most, still it's to correct misinformation and put out correct information and just see which way the wind's blowing.
Oh, and I completely agree. And I think this kind of brings us full circle, in this show, if you will, this LOPvox Live. If you're tuning in now, if you're just tuning at the end, I hope you get a chance to go back and listen to this archive show. You're joining us here at LOPvox Live here on LOP Radio with your host, The Ghost Scientist, and my panel of guests today are Nolo, Rush, Scarlet, IW, and myself. And I definitely hope you guys continuously keep on coming back. I'd like to turn this show into something that people are interested in listening to. There will be, of course, again, give it a bit of a chance. I'd like to get this thing organized, and I think you guys will quickly agree that the show will find your interest and your excitement. And hopefully we can have you on as a guest. We'd like to bring on some of the members of LOP in here and discuss some of the things that they read and some of the things that interest them. And I would like to thank everybody for tuning in here tonight. I would like to thank all of our guests of the show. I would like to also thank Lunatic Outpost and Disturbed for giving us the opportunity to host this type of a show and a program. And, just please tune back into the broadcast. Give us some of your thoughts and ideas. Write posts on the forums that we're going to be checking out. If you've got some ideas about shows that you would like to hear or things that you'd like to discuss, please write a post on Lunatic Outpost, and we definitely will be checking those out to try to make that in a broadcast to come. And once again, this is LOPvox Live with your host, The Ghost Scientist. I thank you very much for joining in, and as always, good journey.